Have you noticed something strange happening around you? People you used to see regularly, friends who were once active and engaged, suddenly becoming less available, less visible, less present in the social spaces they used to occupy. They're not moving away, at least not physically. They're not having some dramatic breakdown or crisis that would explain their withdrawal. They're just quietly fading from the social landscape, declining invitations more often, showing up less frequently, responding to messages with increasing delay or not at all. And if you ask them what's going on, if you manage to catch them in one of those rare moments when they're still accessible, they give you vague answers. They're busy. They're tired. They're going through something. They need space. But there's something in their eyes, something in the quality of their energy, that tells you it's more than that. Something fundamental has shifted in them, and that shift is pulling them away from the world they used to inhabit so easily. And here's what most people don't understand, what they can't understand unless they've experienced it themselves. These people aren't disappearing because something is wrong with them. They're disappearing because something has become right. They've touched something real, something true, something that Alfred Adler would recognize as a fundamental shift in their style of life, in their orientation toward existence itself. And once that shift happens, once you've awakened to certain truths about yourself and the world, you simply cannot participate in ordinary social life the same way anymore. Not because you judge it, not because you think you're better than it, but because it no longer resonates with the frequency you're operating on. It's like trying to enjoy a children's playground when you're an adult. There's nothing wrong with the playground. It serves its purpose. But you've outgrown it, and returning to it feels hollow, inauthentic, like a betrayal of something essential in yourself. Let me show you what this awakening looks like from the inside, because the external disappearance is just a visible symptom of an internal revolution. Someone goes through something, maybe a crisis, maybe a loss, maybe just years of accumulated questions that finally demand answers. And they start looking deeper. They start questioning things they always accepted without thought. They start examining their own patterns, their own motivations, their own unconscious programming. And slowly, sometimes suddenly, they begin to see through things. They see through the social performances that everyone engages in. They see through the comfortable lies people tell themselves to avoid difficult truths. They see through the consensus reality that everyone agrees to pretend is the only reality. They see through their own ego structures, their own defense mechanisms, their own strategies for feeling significant in a world that mostly doesn't care. And this seeing, this awakening, it's irreversible. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you've come to know. You can't go back to the innocent participation in social life that was possible before you recognized the patterns beneath it. And so you start to withdraw, not dramatically, not with announcements or declarations, but quietly, gradually, like water receding from a shore. You attend fewer gatherings. You engage less on social media. You stop volunteering for things you used to volunteer for. You let friendships that were based on proximity or habit naturally fade. You become less available, less visible, less present in the social spaces that once defined so much of your life. And people notice, of course they notice. Your family worries. Your friends feel rejected. Your colleagues think you've become distant or depressed or strange. They try to pull you back. They express concern. They invite you to things with extra emphasis, trying to make you feel guilty or obligated into participating. But here's what they don't understand. You're not rejecting them personally. You're not depressed or broken or going through some phase that will pass. You've simply outgrown a particular way of being in the world, and returning to it would require you to pretend to be someone you no longer are. And you've lost your capacity for that pretense. The awakening has burned away your ability to perform, to play the games, to engage in the social theater that once felt natural but now feels like a violation of your own truth. Adler would understand this completely. He recognized that as individuals develop, as they become more conscious, as they move toward what he called genuine social interest rather than mere social conformity, they often have to pass through periods of withdrawal. Not permanent isolation, not rejection of humanity, but temporary withdrawal necessary for integration, for processing, for allowing the new way of being to solidify before attempting to engage with the world from that new place. And many people get stuck in this withdrawal phase, mistaking it for the destination rather than recognizing it as a passage. But for those who are truly awakening spiritually, the withdrawal is not about escaping the world. It's about finding yourself so completely that you can eventually return to the world without losing yourself in it. And now I want to ask you a question, and I need you to be completely honest with me, because this answer is just for you. Have you felt this pull to withdraw? This increasing inability to engage with social life the way you used to? This sense that something has fundamentally changed in you that makes ordinary interaction feel draining or false or simply irrelevant? Have you been declining invitations more frequently, spending more time alone, pulling back from commitments and relationships that once felt important but now feel like distractions from something more essential? Let me tell you something that maybe no one has ever told you. That pull to withdraw, that need to disappear from social life, it's not antisocial behavior. It's not depression that needs medication. It's not some failure of character or courage. It's a necessary stage in spiritual development. It's your soul demanding the space and silence it needs to integrate the shifts happening within you. And resisting it, forcing yourself to stay engaged when everything in you is calling for withdrawal, that creates suffering. That creates the sense of being fragmented, of living divided, of betraying yourself every time you show up to something you don't want to attend. So I want to ask you something. If what I'm saying resonates deep within your being, if you recognize yourself in this description of the quiet disappearance, go down to the comments right now and simply write this: I'm finding myself in solitude. Just those 5 words. I'm finding myself in solitude. Because when you write that, when you claim that truth, you validate your own experience. You remind yourself that your withdrawal is not pathology but process. And you create a marker for others who are walking this same path and feeling guilty or confused about their need to disappear. Your comment can be that permission for someone who is resisting their own awakening because they're afraid of losing their social connections. So write in the comments, I'm finding myself in solitude. And if you want to share more, if you feel moved to describe what this awakening has been like for you, this is your safe space. Here, we don't judge the spiritually awake person who disappears. We understand that sometimes disappearing is the only way to truly appear. Now let's talk about what Adler would say is really happening here, because his framework illuminates this phenomenon in ways that most spiritual teaching doesn't. Adler believed that every person operates according to what he called a fictional goal, an imagined endpoint that organizes all their striving and gives direction to their life. And for most people, this fictional goal is socially defined. Be successful. Be liked. Be respected. Be secure. Accumulate status, wealth, approval, all the markers that society says indicate a life well lived. And as long as this is your fictional goal, as long as you're organizing your life around these external measures of worth, social engagement feels necessary, even urgent. You need to be seen. You need to network. You need to maintain relationships that might benefit you. You need to participate in the social game because the goal you're chasing requires it. But what happens when your fictional goal shifts? What happens when you go through an awakening that fundamentally changes what you value, what you're striving toward, what gives your life meaning? Suddenly, all that social engagement that felt necessary now feels optional at best, and often feels like an obstacle. Because your new goal, your awakened goal, it's not something you can achieve through social performance. It's something internal. It's about consciousness, about presence, about alignment with your deepest truth. It's about becoming fully yourself rather than becoming what others expect. And this new goal, it requires time alone. It requires silence. It requires withdrawal from the constant stimulation and distraction of social life. You can't hear your own inner voice when you're always listening to external voices. You can't discover who you really are when you're always performing for others. You can't integrate deep insights when you're constantly fragmenting your attention across social obligations. So the awakening person begins to withdraw, and this withdrawal is not escape. It's focus. It's concentration. It's the deliberate choice to prioritize internal development over external engagement. And Adler would say this is a sign of psychological health, not pathology. This is what it looks like when someone shifts from a neurotic lifestyle organized around external validation to a healthy lifestyle organized around internal integrity. The neurotic person, in Adler's terms, is constantly concerned with how they appear to others, constantly performing, constantly anxious about their social standing. They're trapped in what he called the inferiority complex, perpetually feeling less than and trying to compensate through achievement, or approval, or any strategy that might prove their worth to the watching world. But the awakening person has begun to transcend this. They're developing what Adler called the courage to be imperfect, which really means the courage to be yourself without apology, without performance, without the constant need for external validation. And this courage, this shift, it naturally leads to withdrawal from social contexts that require performance. Because once you've tasted authenticity, once you've experienced the relief of simply being yourself without audience or judgment, you can't go back to the exhausting theater of social performance. You'd rather be alone and real than surrounded and fake. You'd rather have silence and truth than noise and pretense. And so you disappear, quietly, gradually, letting the social world recede as your inner world expands. Think about what happens to your social relationships during this awakening process, because this is where the disappearance becomes most visible and most painful. You have friends you've known for years, maybe decades. You have family members you've been close to your entire life. You have colleagues and acquaintances and all the various connections that make up a normal social existence. And as you begin to awaken, as you start to see more clearly, you notice something uncomfortable. Most of these relationships are surface level. Most of these connections are based on shared activities or proximity or habit rather than genuine understanding. Most of these people don't really know you, and you don't really know them, because the relationship has always been conducted at the level of personality, of social masks, of comfortable pretense. And there's nothing wrong with this. These relationships served a purpose. They provided companionship, distraction, a sense of belonging. But as you awaken, as you become more conscious, you find that these surface relationships no longer nourish you. In fact, they drain you. Every conversation that stays safely superficial feels like an energy leak. Every gathering where you have to perform the expected version of yourself feels like a betrayal. Every interaction where you can't speak your truth because it would be too weird or too intense or too much feels like slow suffocation. And you start to realize something that Adler understood deeply. You can't maintain relationships at a level of consciousness you've transcended. You can't engage authentically with people who are still operating unconsciously when you're becoming conscious. Not because you're better than them, not because they're somehow inferior, but because you're literally speaking different languages now, operating on different frequencies, organizing your lives around incompatible goals. So what do? You could force it. You could continue showing up, continue performing, continue pretending that these relationships still work for you. But that creates what Adler called a neurotic split, a division between your authentic self and your performed self, and this division generates suffering, anxiety, a sense of living divided. Or you could try to bring these people along with you, try to share your insights, try to awaken them to what you're seeing. But you quickly discover that doesn't work either. Most people aren't ready. Most people are comfortable in their unconsciousness, comfortable in their patterns, comfortable in the consensus reality that you're questioning. And your attempts to share what you're seeing come across as preachy or superior or weird. They push people away rather than bringing them closer. So you're left with the third option. Withdrawal. Not with drama, not with confrontation, not with burning bridges. Just quiet, gradual withdrawal. You decline more invitations. You initiate contact less frequently. You let conversation stay surface level rather than trying to force depth. You allow relationships that were based on your old way of being to naturally fade as you become someone new. And this feels like death in a way. The death of your old social identity. The death of relationships that once felt important. The death of a way of being in the world that used to work but doesn't anymore. But it's a necessary death. A death that makes space for new life, for new connections with people who can meet you at your new level, for new ways of engaging that honor who you're becoming rather than who you used to be. Adler would recognize this as a natural part of lifestyle change. When your fundamental orientation toward life shifts, when your goals change, when your values deepen, your environment has to change too. You can't stay in the same context with the same people engaging in the same patterns and expect to sustain your new way of being. The old environment will constantly pull you back toward the old patterns. The old relationships will constantly pressure you to be the person they remember rather than the person you're becoming. And if you're not strong enough in your new identity, if you haven't integrated the awakening deeply enough, you will get pulled back. You'll compromise. You'll perform. You'll betray your awakening to maintain your connections. And this is why the withdrawal is so important. It creates space. It removes the constant pressure to be your old self. It allows your new self to develop roots, to solidify, to become strong enough that eventually you can re-engage with the world without being swallowed by it. But that eventual re-engagement, that's later. Right now, in the midst of awakening, withdrawal is not just understandable. It's necessary. It's healthy. It's exactly what should be happening if your spiritual development is genuine and deep. Let me give you a specific example of how this plays out, because I want this to be concrete, not just abstract theory. Imagine someone who's been part of a close friend group for 10 years. They do everything together. Weekly dinners, annual trips, constant group chats. This person is known in the group for being fun, easygoing, always up for whatever. But then something happens. Maybe they lose someone close to them. Maybe they have a health scare. Maybe they just reach that point in their 30s or 40s where the accumulated questions about meaning and purpose become too loud to ignore. And they start reading, meditating, questioning, going deeper. And as they do this work, as they begin to awaken, they notice something. The friend group conversations feel increasingly hollow. The jokes don't land the same way. The gossip feels toxic rather than entertaining. The drinking that used to feel like fun now feels like avoidance. The entire dynamic of the group, which is organized around distraction and superficial connection and mutual validation of the status quo, it starts to feel suffocating. And this person tries to introduce different topics, tries to go deeper, tries to share what they're learning and experiencing. But the group resists. They make jokes. They change the subject. They subtly or not so subtly communicate that this new direction makes them uncomfortable, that they prefer the old version of their friend, the fun one, the easygoing one, the one who didn't ask difficult questions or bring up heavy topics. So this person has a choice. Continue participating in a dynamic that no longer fits, performing the old version of themselves to keep the peace and maintain the connection. Or honor their awakening, honor their new depth, even if it means losing these relationships. And if they choose the second path, if they choose authenticity over belonging, the withdrawal begins. They start declining the weekly dinners more often. They stop responding to the group chat as quickly. They skip the annual trip. And the group notices. They express concern, confusion, sometimes frustration. You've changed, they say, and it's clearly not a compliment. You're not fun anymore. You've gotten so serious. What happened to you? And this person can't really explain in a way the group would understand. How do you tell people who are still asleep that you've woken up? How do you describe seeing through the patterns when they're still identified with the patterns? How do you communicate that you haven't rejected them, you've just outgrown the dynamic, without sounding arrogant or superior? You can't. So you just withdraw. You accept that they'll misunderstand. You accept that they'll construct narratives about what's wrong with you. You accept the loss of these relationships as the price of honoring your own evolution. And it hurts. Even when you know it's right, even when you know you can't go back, it hurts to lose people you cared about, to be misunderstood by people who knew you, to be seen as the problem when you're just trying to be authentic. This is the loneliness of awakening. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being in a world that doesn't recognize what's happening to you, that interprets your growth as pathology, that wants you to stay the person you used to be. Now here's something crucial that Adler understood and that most people miss entirely. This withdrawal, this disappearance from social life, it's not supposed to be permanent. It's a phase, a necessary stage, but not the endpoint. Adler believed deeply in social interest, in the fundamental human need to contribute to the collective good, to be part of something larger than yourself. And true spiritual awakening doesn't lead to permanent isolation. It leads to a different quality of engagement, a deeper form of connection, a more authentic way of contributing. But you have to pass through the withdrawal phase first. You have to do the work of finding yourself, of integrating your insights, of becoming solid in your new identity before you can return to the world in a new way. The danger is getting stuck in withdrawal, mistaking the cocoon for the destination. Some people disappear from social life and never come back. They become permanent hermits, permanent outsiders, convincing themselves that their isolation is enlightenment, when really it's just defended avoidance. They've escaped the falseness of conventional social life but haven't found a way to engage authentically. They're stuck between worlds, no longer able to participate in the old way but not yet capable of the new way. And this stuck state, Adler would say, this is actually a form of the superiority complex. It's a defense against the difficulty of real engagement. It's easier to withdraw completely, to judge the world as unconscious and yourself as awake, than to do the hard work of staying engaged while maintaining your authenticity. The truly awakened person, in Adler's framework, eventually finds a way back. Not back to the old patterns, not back to unconscious participation, but back to engagement from a place of consciousness, back to contribution from a place of authenticity. This is the trajectory. First, unconscious participation in social life, following the scripts, playing the roles, never questioning the patterns. Then, awakening, seeing through the patterns, recognizing the unconsciousness, beginning to question everything. Then, withdrawal, pulling back from social engagement because you can't participate unconsciously anymore but haven't figured out how to participate consciously. Then, integration, doing the internal work, solidifying your new understanding, becoming strong in your authentic identity. And finally, conscious re-engagement, returning to the world but in a new way, contributing from depth, connecting authentically, offering your gifts without compromising your truth. But most people are stuck in stage 3, the withdrawal phase. They've pulled back but haven't completed the integration. They're in the cocoon but haven't emerged as the butterfly. And they need to understand that this is temporary, that the point of spiritual awakening is not to escape the world but to engage with it more fully, more authentically, more consciously. The withdrawal is meant to be preparation for deeper engagement, not a permanent retreat. But in the midst of the withdrawal phase, when you're still processing, still integrating, still finding your footing in this new way of being, the disappearance is necessary. The quietness is necessary. The pulling back from social obligations and expectations and performances is necessary. You can't do the internal work if you're constantly externally engaged. You can't hear your own voice if you're always listening to others. You can't integrate deep insights if you're perpetually distracted by social demands. Let me tell you what happens to the spiritually awakening person that makes this withdrawal inevitable. They develop what might be called sensitivity to falseness. They can feel, almost physically, when someone is being inauthentic. They can sense when a conversation is performance rather than genuine exchange. They can detect the subtle manipulations, the ego games, the unconscious patterns that drive most social interaction. And this sensitivity, which is really just heightened consciousness, it makes ordinary social life almost unbearably uncomfortable. It's like having your hearing suddenly become 10 times more acute and being surrounded by jarring noise. You can't unknow what you're perceiving. You can't unfeel what you're feeling. And every social engagement becomes an exercise in endurance, in tolerating levels of falseness that used to be invisible but now feel intolerable. So you withdraw. Not because you're judgmental, not because you think you're better, but because you simply cannot bear the dissonance anymore. You cannot participate in conversations you know are empty. You cannot engage in dynamics you recognize as destructive. You cannot perform enthusiasm for things that feel hollow. Your awakening has made you too sensitive, too aware, too honest to play the games anymore. And until you find contexts where genuine connection is possible, until you meet people who are operating at a similar level of consciousness, until you develop the skill of being in the world without being consumed by it, withdrawal is your only option. It's self-preservation. It's protecting the tender new growth of your awakening from the harsh environment of conventional social life. Adler would say this is the period where you're developing your authentic style of life, where you're discovering who you really are beneath all the conditioning and expectations and performances. And this discovery requires space. It requires silence. It requires freedom from the constant input of others' opinions and expectations and judgments. You have to disappear from the social world to appear to yourself. You have to withdraw from external engagement to engage deeply with your internal reality. And this process takes time. It can't be rushed. It can't be forced. It has to unfold at its own pace, and that pace is different for everyone. Some people need months. Some need years. Some need a lifetime of moving back and forth between withdrawal and engagement, each cycle going deeper, integrating more, becoming more solidly themselves. But wherever you are in this process, whatever phase of awakening or withdrawal or integration you're in, you need to know that it's okay. You're not doing it wrong. You're not broken. You're not antisocial or depressed or failing at life. You're undergoing a profound transformation, and transformation requires temporary dissolution. The old self has to die before the new self can fully emerge. The old way of being has to fall away before the new way can solidify. And during this transition, during this death and rebirth, withdrawal from social life is not just understandable. It's absolutely necessary. Here's what I want you to understand if you're in the midst of this disappearing process. If you're the one quietly pulling back from social life, feeling guilty about it, wondering if something is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. Something is right with you. You're responding appropriately to an internal shift that demands space and silence to complete itself. You're honoring your own evolution even when that evolution requires disappointing others, declining invitations, letting relationships fade. And yes, people will misunderstand. Yes, people will judge. Yes, you'll lose connections that once felt important. But you'll also find something far more valuable. You'll find yourself. You'll discover who you really are beneath all the conditioning and performance and pretense. You'll develop a quality of presence and authenticity that's simply not available to people who never withdraw, who never question, who never do the difficult work of self-examination and integration. And eventually, when the integration is complete, when you've solidified in your new way of being, you'll be able to return to the world. Not to the same contexts, not to the same relationships, but to new contexts where genuine connection is possible, to new relationships with people who can meet you at your depth, to new ways of contributing that honor both your authenticity and your fundamental need to be part of something larger than yourself. This is the promise. The withdrawal is temporary. The integration is profound. And the eventual re-engagement is more satisfying than anything you experience before your awakening because it's based on truth rather than performance, on genuine connection rather than social obligation, on authentic contribution rather than the desperate need for validation. Look, if you've made it this far, if you've stayed with me through this entire exploration, it's because you're experiencing this disappearance yourself, or you're trying to understand someone who is. And I want you to know that this is one of the most important and least discussed aspects of spiritual awakening. Everyone talks about the insights, the breakthroughs, the moments of clarity and expanded consciousness. But few people talk about the loneliness, the confusion, the painful necessity of withdrawing from social life to integrate what you're learning. Few people talk about how isolating it is to see things others don't see, to value things others don't value, to need silence and solitude when the culture screams that connection and engagement are the only signs of health. This channel exists precisely for people in this situation. For those who are quietly disappearing from social life and feeling guilty or confused about it. For those who know they're awakening but don't have anyone to talk to about it because everyone around them is still asleep. Here we explore these difficult aspects of spiritual development without sugarcoating them, without pretending that awakening is all bliss and light, without denying the very real costs that come with choosing consciousness over comfort. Every week I create content for people who are navigating this lonely path, who need to be reminded that their withdrawal is not pathology but process, that their disappearance is not failure but transformation, that their inability to engage with ordinary social life the way they used to is not a problem to fix but a sign of growth to honor. So if this resonates with you, if you feel understood for the first time in months or years, subscribe to the channel. Not for me, but for you. Because you deserve to have a space that validates your experience, that affirms your path, that reminds you that what looks like disappearance is actually the beginning of a deeper form of appearance. Like this video if it helped you feel less guilty about your need to withdraw. Because every like helps me reach more people who are struggling with this same transition, who are questioning whether they're doing spiritual development right, who need permission to honor their own timing and their own process. And hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next reflection, because we're going to continue exploring what it means to awaken spiritually in a world that's still mostly asleep. I'll see you in the next video. And in the meantime, honor your need to disappear. Trust the process. Allow the withdrawal to do its work. And know that on the other side of this temporary disappearance is a quality of presence and authenticity that will allow you to return to the world in ways you can't imagine yet. You're not running away. You're going deeper. And what you find in that depth will eventually become your gift to a world that desperately needs what only the awakened can offer.